Dr. Paul here from various Substacks with
Yes.
Jeremy Fox yet again, Next Level Psychology. And we're already joined by Michael in Australia, I believe. All right, excellent. We're here to talk tonight about morality, which, wow, lots of people joining, which on the surface doesn't sound like lots of hearts, too. Interesting.
Yes. Thank you.
On the surface, doesn't sound like necessarily the most exciting headline, but one of the things that I had in mind in talking about this is for us to get into essentially the taxonomy of all the various topics you see talked about out there, like narcissism, for example. What does morality have to do with narcissism? Or character, or character maturity, or personality? What do all these things relate to in terms of being a part of each other or relating to each other? So, morality, I wanted to talk about as one of the three pillars of what amounts to character maturity tonight. Morality has to do with decision making and to choosing, right from wrong.
Right.
But if you think about the concept of choosing to do right versus wrong, there's also such a thing as a person who you could say is a moral person or a good person, but they have poor boundaries in the area of money or love and romance or their career or their friendships, or they do too much to help their friends, and they're a good person, but they exhaust themselves by helping their friends too
Sure.
much. So they have poor
Right.
boundaries. Or another kind of person in the area of attention ability and mindfulness and being thoughtful and aware, what formally is called theory of mind, or which I call observing ego, or the rest of the public calls mindfulness. If you lack mindfulness, you can lack that, but still be a good moral person. You just
Okay.
don't pay enough attention.
Right.
Does that make sense? I mean, have
Oh,
you ever
absolutely.
known people like that in your life where
Yeah.
they're a good person, but they're always getting into trouble, not of their own doing, but somebody else's doing, and you feel bad for them because there's such a good person. You consider them a friend, or they're your mother, your sister, or somebody in your life, but things never go very well for them.
Right.
And it's not because they're a bad person, it's because of some other thing, either their boundaries or their level of mindfulness.
Right. Yeah, I love that. I think that gets into the idea of how you experience your own self in terms of conscientiousness, in terms of openness. Like, are you too open or not enough? Are you too disagreeable? Are you too agreeable? Where are you on the sliding scale, like the rule, like a slide
Haha.
rule, like a ruler? Like, how do you measure across these different self realms of perception, really? I mean, I am going to say I think you can be here's ooh, let's get into this. So I think you can be a morally good person who would choose the right thing if it's put like right in front of them. But you can be unwise because when you're in a
Right.
situation when you're unobservant, you're being unwise and not exhibiting your observing ego and not developing it and not having good boundaries. There's a lack of wisdom there. So I would kind of counter with that and say, well, so you just there's inexperience or a naivete there, or there's a attention deficit, either in a literal sense or in an observing ego sort of mentalization sense, however you want to put it. Like, what are
Yeah.
you attending to? What is your sort of construct about other people's decisions as they impact you? Do you believe that you don't have a voice? Are you more of a collectivist person where you're just going to automatically listen to someone else if they have a title or if they seem to have more authority than you? There you get into the experiments, right? Like the Milgram
Huh.
experiment of, well, they know what they're doing. I'm going to press the buttons.
Right, right. Yeah.
Well, I won't. I'll retract that. There's been a lot written about Milgram. I don't know how much you keep up with that. No, no hate, but there's a lot written about like, well, that experiment wasn't fully saying what we thought it said.
Ethical.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Or was it the Stanford prison experiment?
Yeah. That one also
The
been,
Lucifer effect,
yeah. Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, we should talk about that one sometime. I think that was so for one thing, that was shut down, from what I understand, by Zimbardo's girlfriend, who went in there and said, "You have to shut this down." He
I didn't
told
know it was
them,
his girlfriend.
well, she brought up
Wow.
like, "This is really getting out of hand and inhumane," and then he
Yeah.
decided, "Oh yeah, it is." So, and for the one of the viewers, basically, some students were divided into prison guards and prisoners, and essentially the prisoners, so the prison guards really abused that power and treated the prisoners poorly. But there's been post hoc, sort of after the fact analysis to say, well, there's a selection bias if you sign up to do something like that anyway, that maybe you're more authoritarian. There's been a lot of debate about that after the fact, that that isn't really an objective study, and I think that's worth leaning into. I can't quote anything now off the top of my head, but I do know that there's been enough holes poked in it that people
Uh,
don't cite it as much as they used to, in this idea that we're all morally flexible. It's kind of viewed as a
Right. Right.
less of a strong mic drop, which is funny because even in my day of being in college, it was considered this great experiment. And I think
Yeah.
since in recent years, it's been seen very unfavorably.
Interesting how theories kind of go that way
Sure.
sometimes if enough time passes. I was spending a lot of time today working on my model of human courtship, and I was looking at three theories that don't arrive at a final conclusion, like a complete model of human courtship. So Sternberg, Rusbolt with the
Yes.
attachment stuff, and then or I'm sorry, Hazen and Shaver were the
Right.
attachment stuff, and then Rusbolt was the investment model
Right.
favored by John Gottman. And I was just thinking, hello, I've been talking about this for 25 years, and
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm watching these scientists who are doing research, which I'm not doing, like arriving at things I arrived at 25 years ago. So it's kind of funny what you're saying about Milgram and the Stanford prison experiment, how what was once hot and considered solid research over time can be having holes poked in it. That's interesting.
Hey, I found, so Dr. Natalie's waving at us, and I told her hello.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Dr. Natalie, I mean, part of what I thought we could talk about tonight was going to be narcissism as the exact opposite of this thing called character maturity. Narcissism being somewhat like being a child in an adult's body.
Yeah, that's what Kohut said. Heinz Kohut. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love it. Very good.
So, okay. So, taxonomy. You were talking a little bit ago about openness, trait openness, and
Yes.
it reminded me of the big five,
Yes.
right? Personality traits.
Yes.
And I found myself going back 25, 30 years to when it was once explained to me the difference between personality and character,
Ooh,
that they're
okay.
very different things. And I think a lot of folks today confuse all these various terminologies and they tend to latch on to just one model as their
Right.
favored model. And
Yep.
then they, try to explain everything through just that model. 25, 30 years ago, it was explained to me that personality and character are not the same. Although today we call what used to be called character disorders, we now call them personality disorders. So things like borderline personality, antisocial personality, these
Yeah.
aren't really personality styles. So the word we're using to describe an illness name today is completely erroneous
I
when
like
it
where you're
comes to
going.
the history and philosophy of medicine. There used to be departments of universities called the history and philosophy of science and the
Right.
history and philosophy of medicine, where history and the development of models mattered.
Yeah.
Like where they came from could be traced to solid material or just neologistic stuff that like we've been talking about a bit lately.
Oh, yes. Pop
Neologisms,
psychology. Yeah.
neologistic pop psychology. So the big five, I think, is a remarkable predictive model. It's the best model yet, and yet it's not perfect
Right.
for the reason that it's based in pure big data.
Right.
It
Right.
was the harvesting of data, the entire internet, the use of words. What are the most commonly used words to describe human traits? And then they bundled them together into categories. And then you have these five categories, the biggest one being neuroticism. I think
Right.
that's kind of a wastebasket category, really, because it's every bad trait or, every non-utilitarian trait in a person could be just thrown into that giant basket, neuroticism. And then it's called the big five personalities or personality
Yes.
traits, right? So
Yes.
I was told a personality is a style. It has nothing to do with maturity level or development.
Mhm.
And so if you look at the big five, then that adheres to the concept of personality traits because the big five is not about maturity. It's just your style. It's what you were born with. It's what you're naturally good at. It's what you
Right.
do. It doesn't presume to explain how could you improve yourself or grow in any way. It's just this is what you got. This is what you're like as a
Sure.
person. And that's personality, a style. But character is something that is grown. It's something that tracks hopefully with development and isn't perfect at adhering to chronologic age. I mean, ideally, if there were perfect systems of education and back to morality, moral instruction, then age would track with maturity level. And it does so less and less, I think, today.
Okay.
As we traverse generation after generation, there's less and less um, I guess you could say, tracking of maturity level of development with chronologic age, like as a coefficient, like a 1.0 coefficient of connectedness between the
Right.
two.
Right.
It's less and less and less with each generation. And one of the ways I think about that is, if you think about the primary people in your life who have given you quote moral instruction or developmental instruction, those would be your parents, right?
Right.
So more and more, today we have broken families, divorce, single parent households, less and less moral instruction given to the young.
Yeah.
So what would happen if the young who've received less moral instruction than the prior generation received, how much would they have to bestow onto their own children if they even have any? It would be less than the prior generation. So just
Yeah.
like, you may have an embarrassing uncle that you don't want to come to Thanksgiving dinner because he's 45 but acts like he's 16.
Sure.
Well, how much could he instruct his offspring to
Yeah.
grow to a certain developmental age? His peak would be 16 if he were the only instructor.
Right.
So then
Right.
luckily there are teachers, professors, there are spiritual people in our lives and so forth and friends that we learn from, we get moral instruction from. But if it were only about the parents, then somebody who's only 16 on the inside, even though they are of parental age 30 to 45, let's say, they can only instruct their children up to the age of 16, who then can only instruct their children to what age? I
Right.
mean, it's a downslope.
What's a regression? Yeah, there's
Yes.
continual like de-evolution of I mean, so this is something that Murray Bowen talked about with this idea of, and I need to make sure I get it right, but the guy who worked a lot on the genograms. So he talked about societal regression, and how anxiety can cause rational thought to be sidelined. Polarization in, cultural factions is a good indication of societal regression as well. He talked about polarization, division into contrasting groups or opinions. Yeah. So, and again, to be clear, I'm not saying someone's right or wrong. I'm saying like just the fact that we are so against one another in many ways. Like that's something that he in the even in that day when he was active was very keen on commenting on as a mental health expert. So really there's a lot to unpack with that of where do you get your notion of right and wrong and why does it matter? I mean, should it just be intuitive? I think now there's a lot of sort of folk wisdom that it's intuitive in some way. I mean, so Murray Bowen was born in 1913, died in 1990. I mean, so he was not even around for our internet age, but it's interesting because you'll get people of faith and not. So people who are atheists, people who are Christian, who will talk about innate morality, fine. You'll get people who talk about morality needing to be taught, who are atheists or of faith, right? So I think that just shows how widely our sense of that, and it's really a combination of the two. I think there's genetic components to how viscerally you experience empathy, and that's certainly something that tugs at your heart to make you want to do the right thing when you see someone suffering. But then sometimes people will learn to ignore that, and then others who you don't feel that sense of visceral empathy will learn to mentalize and have a strong code of honor that it's just wrong to hurt someone. So why do it, even if you don't feel for them?
Right,
So
right.
you would like
You
that
make
term
me
super ego lacunae or the holes in an
oh,
individual's conscience. What were you going to say first? I just
yeah,
wanted to.
yeah. Yeah, I was gonna remind us of the importance of bell curves. No particular individual is representative of the entire species. We all fall on bell curves of everything, every measure of our psychology, so to speak. And if we don't have an average at the middle of the bell curve, then there's nothing to measure. There are no laws to discover, and there is no psychology, therefore. So we we all fall as individuals on a bell curve. There's a median or a mean of the bell curve. That's what
Right.
rules are based on. Basically, that's an important concept. When you were
Yeah.
talking about empathy, it made
Yeah.
me think of bell curves, right? Because there are less empathic people and more empathic people, but
Exactly.
is the median or the mean of humanity somewhat empathic? And then we get into evolutionary psychologists, right? You've heard me say before, I think there's that, every model of psychology, every school of thought tends to have its sweet spot, what it's best at. Cognitive therapy is great at depression. Behavioral therapy is great at treating anxiety.
Yeah.
Self psychology is narcissism, spotting narcissism and rooting it out. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Yeah.
That
Nailed
concept,
that.
right? So no pun intended. But but if we the fact that each of these individual theories have a sweet spot and can be a tool applied to a particular type of problem and just throw it all away and say, well, none of them are exactly right or none of them are universal models. That's not to say we should throw them all away.
No,
They
it's
all
not at
have
all
a
to say
role.
that.
Yeah.
No, I would say there's, the idea of nuance and depth, those terms get thrown around a lot, but really there's no substitute for learning what tool does what. So, I mean, EMDR therapy is a behavioral therapy. It is well, it's cognitive and behavioral, but it's a desensitization model, which is associated with behaviorism and behavioral therapy. And it's a cognitive model because it tells the client to think of a negative cognition that they want to desensitize. And so it combines cognitive and behavioral into this very behavioral heavy model. So anyway, it's its own thing, but it combines cognitive and behavioral into something emergent. EMDR does. Basically, imagine you go to somebody and they have a horrible bedside manner as your EMDR therapist. They're like, okay, sit down. Tell me what it is you want to desensitize. Give me the negative cognition. Let's go. And they just have no person centered, no conversational capacity. Well, that's poorly delivered. I mean, I think of A Clockwork Orange and how Alex gets that Ludovico technique where it's that famous picture of him with his eye. Good thumbnail for our video. But it's basically,
I'm
okay,
gonna
that's
use
deep.
that
Yeah.
as the public facing.
That could, hey, dude, that could get some views. I mean, but basically, that's the naked face of desensitization with no therapeutic presence. And so when people say, oh, EMDR, this and that, I would say, if people have some comments about EMDR just being a technique or a gimmick, well, it's actually only phases 3 through 6 are the desensitization. The rest of them are therapeutic in a more relational sense, in a more positive ideational sense, where you imagine resources and you do positive guided imagery without desensitization. But anyway, to your point, the any good therapy is going to address the whole person. So I think using them as just bludgeoning sticks or workbooks to smack someone with, it just doesn't cut it because your great reminders that the observing ego matters in the self, right? Ego as the self. Like the concept of differentiation, also from Murray Bowen, comes to mind. Like how to develop what's you and what's not you. What are your emotions and what are your actual convictions? That's what differentiation means. And it's a concept that used to be drawn on quite a bit in therapy. And that's another term for us that's like character. It's certainly not personality because it has to do with your ability to recognize your own emotions and thoughts and to respond how you want, how you choose to, not out of raw reaction.
Well, it's growth. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the concept of growth. There was the old term personal growth, right? Or personal growth books. Self help was a genre in
Yeah.
yesteryear.
Yeah.
Um, but if you think about personality, whether it's the big five, the latest craze, or it was the Myers Briggs back in the day, however you thought of personality,
Yeah.
that doesn't grow. If anything, you're born with a temperament, which is like a crude version of personality. And
Sure.
then that temperament expresses itself naturally in the personality eventually. But personality itself is not a commentary on predictiveness in terms of what you're going to decide to study at university or who you're going to decide to marry exactly. It's not predictive in the sense of your free will, but character is predicated in part on the quality of what goes into your freely willed choices.
Yeah. Yes, I think when we look at character, I mean, you could have someone who is absent-minded, who's good-natured, who doesn't care. I mean, you have someone who is uh not less conscientious than baseline or not conscientious at all, and they can either be easygoing and kind or they can be, sociopathic. So I'm guessing that some people would argue that if you have someone who's totally disagreeable, totally non-conscientious, highly neurotic, not open, all of the, like, they have these dials turned in different ways, right? Then they would have low character. But you could probably say that they may simply be someone who wants to be left alone or who does not seek out opportunities to hurt others. So I would say you're right. Those personality elements don't say how someone's going to behave. If they have a guiding telos or purpose in some capacity, like can reflect on their behavior, then they're still not going to choose the worst thing, even if they know they could do it.
Well, it might say something about generalities of what they will prefer, like what kind of products they might like or what kind of jobs they might find themselves in.
Right.
That's true, but that's not the same as a specific decision. So,
Right.
so help me out with something. I'm wrestling with some ideas here because I heard you using the term conscientious,
Yeah.
and I think of conscience and conscientiousness in a very old-fashioned way,
Sure.
whereas the Big Five has taken this term conscientious and now applied it to this giant swath of aggregated traits that are built from a big data model that took the internet and all the words on it and then aggregated them. Okay. So back at the beginning, I was going to give you my little gripe about the Big Five. I love the Big Five. I think it's wonderfully useful. It explains so much. It's the most advanced model of personality to date. But a giant glaring flaw in my mind about it is it's based only on data. It's data aggregated. And on top of that, it's words, it's linguistics, right? So Freud gave the term the talking cure to what it was he discovered with the concept of psychology and psychotherapy. And the prevailing school of philosophy around the time of Freud were the linguists who believed the mind is structured like a language. The mind digests stories. The mind runs on stories. It feeds on stories. It develops based on stories. What I was reading about today, Sternberg's model that's now, further advanced, he added to his talking about romance, he added to his the three ingredients of romance basically amount to the triune brain, as far as
Yeah.
I can tell. That's basically Sternberg didn't discover anything. He just saw, oh, the triune brain. You have the reptilian, the mammalian, and the higher brain. Those are the three factors of romance. But he's added a concept called romance as a story, which
Interesting.
of course makes perfect sense.
That's awesome.
Um,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
I like that.
Well, Well, I'm glad you do. I've been talking about it for 20 years, predating
Well,
Sternberg.
I
But
know.
nonetheless,
That's why
but
well, that's one of the
but
reasons I
whatever.
like it. There you go.
But nonetheless, the idea that if romance is like a story, if our lives are like a story, and if a story has characters in it, and
Yes.
there is a main character, and you are the main character of your life, then that implies that there are obstacles to growth that you need to cultivate virtues to overcome and proceed with what you are meant to become, sort of your destiny. So one of the favorite quotes of Freud was actually quoting the philosopher Epictetus, who was a Stoic, and
Right.
Epictetus said, "Here is destiny." Character is destiny, which means if you hope to have some kind of control over what becomes of your life, the only way to do that is to work on whatever character is. And character, to Kohut and Kernberg, the self psychologist, Freud himself, and Epictetus, and the ancient philosophers, Aristotle and Socrates as well, character is goodness. It's being whatever a good person is,
Right.
was one of the great questions of the ancient philosophers. So, what is goodness? So, goodness must have components to it, and the components aren't going to be personality traits because we're all different in our personality.
No,
We're all born with
absolutely.
a certain temperament. We're dominant in conscientiousness or in ocean. Neuroticism, openness. C is
Extroversion.
what? Extroversion, right. A is
Agreeable.
agreeableness, right? And
Yeah,
supposedly women are more agreeable than men. I mean, that's another problem I have with the big five is if it truly is personalities, then what does biologic sex have to do with any of that? It shouldn't be a part of it.
that
If you have
makes
a personality, it has zero to do with the biology of your uh, X and Y chromosomes. It should be your style as a
right.
person, not as a man or as a woman.
Yeah, I think
And
I think well, and there's different ways of looking at morality. There's different For sure, I mean, going back to your model, I think that's why it's cool that you've got the ethical code component, which is traditionally considered more masculine, more honor focused, and then you've got boundaries, and women and men can have different boundaries, and some men are more avoidant, and some women are. Some women are more anxious, some men are more anxious in their attachment, and all of the
right,
above, like you said.
does
Except
this mean women have bad boundaries compared to men? I mean, how are their boundaries? Let me close a window here.
I think it's a good point about how do we parse this considering traditionally certain things are associated with either gender. We don't want to pathologize someone's style because it goes against the grain or is with the grain. I mean, I do think
Well, it shouldn't
most
matter.
it should
It's
matter.
their style.
Most people have a point. Go ahead, you go.
Well, I was going to say there's no, better or worse style as a person in how you communicate or what job you choose or what you would prefer in a partner or what your parenting style is. It's a style. It's not a feature of morality.
Sure.
So it brings us back to morality, right? Because
Right.
anybody can have any of the combination of the big five traits in their style, or previously anybody could have any of the types of the Myers-Briggs styles of personality, or the color wheel, or before all of this, astrology. That's also kind of personality styling. Or in the area of love and romance, there used to be matchmakers and yentas, and they would match you according to your style to try to get you with a complementary style of a person. But none of the above has anything to do with what we call morality, which I believe to be a function of character. And I
Yes.
think character is a bigger umbrella term within which morality exists. And from all of the things I've learned, I believe morality to refer to choices, to decision making, to knowing the difference between right and wrong. Okay. So many, many years ago, when I was, thinking about how do I bring these models together? Like if there were such a thing as a unification model of psychology, says that of Arthur Staats, Staats. He's deceased now, but he was University of Hawaii. I called him once. He was one of the first, what you would call unification theorists. How do all these models interweave? Not many people try to unify them anymore. Everyone gets their pet model and then wants to expand just that model,
Right.
whether it's evolutionary psychology or Jungianism or self psychology or positive psychology. Martin Seligman probably is the only modern unification theorist left that there is, trying to bring together models and see where they connect. But back in the day when I was thinking about morality and decision making, I was thinking about what guide me through this. What are the two components of making a decision? Well, a decision is only a decision if it has impact, either on me or others, or probably both.
Yes. Okay.
Otherwise, it's only a thought.
Right. I was going to say it's a emotion. There's an emotional and cognitive component to any decision typically. And that can go to like the somatic marker hypothesis from Antonio Damasio, but let's go, which is fine. So, but
I
we can
I
also
I
go ahead.
don't view like if you isolate decisions. How I got to this was I was looking at the legal definition of a person.
Okay.
Like when you're talking about involuntary commitment and mental health holds and involuntary medicines and things like this,
Yeah.
lawyers and judges actually have a legal definition of a person. And I thought that was interesting. How can the law have a defined person and yet psychology is it's got 50 variables to a person. It's got like
Yeah.
all these working parts to a person, but the law just has 3 parts.
Decision, but the law has to make some expedient choices, and psychology can just keep going ad infinitum, I
Right.
guess. But
Yeah.
go ahead.
As my very first professor called it, what do you plan on giving this patient? Chronic undifferentiated therapy?
That's great. Yeah.
Right. Instead of chronic undifferentiated schizophrenia, she called it chronic undifferentiated therapy.
Mm.
But lawyers and judges, their definition is it's an entity and that means it could be a person or a business. It
Yeah,
could be
I was thinking that.
a human or a business, right? Because now businesses can be legally
Yeah,
people,
LLCs,
person,
absolutely.
LLCs. So it's an entity with rights. Now, to my mind, that implies a boundary.
Right,
That's
exactly.
your rights. And the entity has cognitive, emotional, and volitional capacity.
Yes.
That's the
Okay.
legal definition of a person, an entity with rights and cognitive, emotional, and volitional capacity. Well, notice the separation out of these 3 things. Cognitive is thoughts, ideas, content, emotional, the emotions, and then volitional is decision making capacity.
Yes, yes,
So they're
absolutely.
separated from each other, right? So based on that, I want to hear more about the theorist that you were mentioning there that believes emotion is part of decisions.
Mhm.
But I separated them out based on this legal definition. There are thoughts, there's emotion, and then there is volition or decision making. Devoid of emotion or thought, it's volition, it is will. Yes or no, committing to action or non-action. And so when I thought about volition in free will decisions as a component of the legal definition of a person, I thought, well, what is a decision as differentiated from just a thought? What differentiates a decision is no matter how small, it could be very small, but it will have impact on someone. It'll either have impact on me, others, or both. Or it's not a decision, it's just a thought. So if it's going to have impact on me or others or both, then what are the 2 feeders that lead up to the decision? And the first one is ethics. Before I make
Yes,
this decision, is it going to do bad to others? Otherwise, maybe I shouldn't make it. Maybe I shouldn't commit to it.
right.
So that's ethics. But there's another side to ethics. The flip side would be if I make the decision, yes, it's not going to hurt others. It might even help them, but could it hurt just me based on the environment I'm in? And the word that came to mind to me to describe that, the environment I'm in, is it going to treat me well
Right.
based on my decision? And the word for that, I think, is intuition.
Okay.
My intuition is not the same when I'm a toddler as it is when I'm an adult man because I've been in various environments and made various decisions in various environments and
Mhm.
learned from the great diversity of environments how various environments will treat me
Right.
based on certain decisions that I might be prone to make in them. I would call that intuition. And so, right alongside ethics, I think intuition is a driver or feeder of our decisions. the opposite of ethics. Ethics is what I'm about to do going to harm others? If yes, then I need to not do it if I have good
Right.
ethics. And the synonym for that is conscience. So when you say conscientiousness, I never know these days whether it's referring to the big five assigned terminology to a whole aggregate of words, or is it referring to conscientiousness as ethics? In other words, as knowing right from wrong in how a decision will impact others. And then the inverse of that will be, okay, say I'm an ethical person, but if I go, walking in where angels fear to tread, and I'm being a fool and I'm being a good person, not caring for myself equally with others, then I'm lacking intuition. I have a
Right.
lot of naivete, right? Like the inverse of intuition would be naivete. Naivete and intuition are flip sides of a coin. Intuition is I'm worldly wise, I'm shrewd. Another word for it is shrewdness. The flip side is naivete.
Right. Absolutely. I mean,
So you can be a morally, ethically good person. I shouldn't say morally, because I think moral means both conscientious and intuitive. For example, Mother Teresa was no fool. Mother Teresa built a worldwide organization as a incredibly ethical person, a saint, but she was no fool either. She knew how to do business and how to navigate the world's politics in building her charity. So she had intuition,
yeah.
not just conscientiousness.
Right.
So
Well,
anyway, I'll stop there for now. What do you think of this idea?
mm, well, I think there's a lot to positively look at there. I think to be a fully moral person, you certainly need to have that sense of mindfulness or intuitiveness, because if someone is under your charge, like a child or a dependent, a family or something else, and you are foolish and allow them to be descended on, right? Or foolishness is kind of an old school term, so maybe I'll step away from that. But I mean, if you don't protect your family as a father, you would be seen as negligent. And so you can have good intentions and be negligent if you aren't aware or you don't intuit danger around you.
Right.
So I like
If you
that.
aren't, yeah, intuitive about environments,
So
environmentally aware.
so the person I was talking about, Antonio Damasio, had this proposal that the brain uses emotionally tagged signals to guide decision making. So they're basically mental shortcuts, like heuristics that link your past experiences and emotional outcomes to current choice. So it's the brain inferring, okay, what is going to happen if you make a decision, and then making one based off that inference. So it's that kind of Bayesian model, predictive processing model that's very in vogue now. So it's
Okay.
basically you have a cognitive marker to guide decision making. So it's a mental shortcut. And when you're faced with a decision, you retrieve memories, okay, and assign them valence markers. So just quick emotional
Ah,
tags like safe,
okay.
risky,
Right.
rewarding, painful. And
Right.
it's
Right.
kind of limbic prefrontal circuitry is where that's stored. And they bias where your attention goes.
A healthy hippocampus that assigns value
Yeah,
correctly, right? If you
right.
have a bird out hippocampus from your PTSD, you're not going to make
Yes.
very good value emotional valence assignments to things.
Yes. So Yes, it's the, yes, so that actually it's interesting you bring that up. So the somatic marker hypothesis, which is what I'm
Yeah.
referring to, actually comes from Damasio's research with patients who have frontal lobe injuries. So they could keep reasoning abstractly, but they have trouble making decisions. And so they're indecisive because the tipping point of emotion deciding where to go isn't there. So you could just engage in reasoning and sort of bean counting and,
Hmm.
sophistry, just continual discourse ad infinitum versus, having an emotional bias to finally pin your decision on. And I mean, I want to be clear. There's been pushback on that model, like
Yeah.
on how quickly you make a mental calculation based on thoughts or if it's always emotion. It just and when what takes place.
Not against that model. What I was proposing is like a model of perfection where
Yes.
you see the discrete working parts. But that's not to say that the working parts don't work together. Of course, they work together, right? So definitely, I could see emotion feeding the decision making process for sure. In fact, if you think of this idea of ethics is I want to treat others well, and the more experiences I have of making a mistake and hurting others, the more empathic knowledge I fill up my tank with of ethics. But if I don't also have an intuitive sense, a worldly wise shrewdness for environments of various kinds where various kinds of decisions are made, then I have nothing to go on in terms of choosing to do something in any particular environment. That, in and of itself, can be a cause of indecisiveness that you're describing. But so can trauma be, because
Absolutely. Yes.
say that in my formative years, let me just make something up.
Yeah.
Say that I dated a blonde, a person who viciously broke up with me in a very shaming way.
Right.
And then I go
Yeah.
on in dating life and I meet another blonde that seems like a nice person and we're getting along wonderfully, but something's rearing its ugly head from the past and it's masquerading as legitimate intuition, but it's not legitimate. It's
Yep.
traumatic. That's not intuition. That's not the intuition I'm talking about.
No, that's not wise. That's baggage, that's transference. So, yeah, I'm with you. I think how we make decisions versus how we make decisions, how should we make them? Like what do we do if left to our own devices? Well, it's probably something like the somatic marker hypothesis where you just accrete, you accumulate experience and then go off of those heuristics, but in the wake of that, and that's where research is going, like how much does affect regulation, so regulating your emotion, impact decision making, and how much does that play in when those somatic markers are activated? So if you are maintaining your observing ego and you think on, what boundaries do I want to put in, what are good decisions that I can make, you'll be able to shore up any weaknesses in your own behavior. You'll be able to recognize I'm feeling an unease here because this is a familiar situation, but I can remind myself that it's not destined to turn out the exact same way as other situations have. So, I mean, that's the task of EMDR, is to desensitize prior anxiety signals, to
Right,
have someone
right,
be aware. So, we
right.
need.
The
Yeah.
person can be more present minded, in the present, mindful, so to speak, living in the present. EMDR does that. Do you hear me
Yeah.
okay?
Yes.
And desensitizes the overly charged valences of these emotional markers. I mean,
Absolutely.
when you're tight and making them erroneous, previously they were erroneous. Now they're more accurate
Yep.
emotional markers. I mean,
Abs-
rather than saying emotional markers, I mean, I think in my view, what you're talking about in this research is belief systems that aggregate into what we all call a worldview. Are you
yeah,
more of a pessimist or more of an optimist? Well, that's based on the aggregation of your emotional markers. Are they more markedly negative or markedly positive?
right.
Optimism
So,
versus optimism as a worldview.
yes. So, I think this is where it gets into what role PTSD can play, because emotional tags that are body sensations can come into play for certain things. Okay. Like avoiding certain situations and say one thing, and you can have some that say other things. And so you could have people who have PTSD around certain situations and they say avoid that, and they otherwise live pretty beneficial life, pretty full, engaging lives. You have people who descend into the homebound living of agoraphobia. So I get it, the
Right.
worldview component. Yes, like what does it say that you need to avoid things? Is the avoidance gaining traction and accumulating into a snowball effect? So I
Right.
yes,
And then how accurate is your intuition going to be? And this is a synonym would be, or a synonymic
yes,
phrase would be trusting your gut. If you've ever had
right,
patients who say, I can't go with my gut, it's always wrong, or I just can't make a decision that requires going with your gut. What does your gut tell you? You say to the patient, and they say, I don't know. And it's because they still have trauma that's yet to be processed, right? It's because these emotional markers are inaccurate in them. And so they don't have good intuition that's reliable intuition. So in the model I was describing, I'm describing a person who has had EMDR, they've cleaned out the cobwebs, their intuition is going to be as accurate as it can be, subjectively accurate. We're all subjective with our life's experiences, but we're not robots. If you've been in enough, dark alley situations where there's a shadowy figure walking
right,
toward you, I mean, maybe you need to learn to walk out into the light, walk the other way, and have some intuition. So in the model that I developed, I actually define wisdom as being uniquely, specifically regarding decision making.
right,
Wisdom is that of decision making, wisdom of decisions. There's not wisdom
yes,
of emotion and wisdom of love and friendship. I mean, there's wisdom of making decisions. And if the two feeders to every decision we've ever made are ethics or conscientiousness, not
yeah,
the personality trait, but the grown trait. See, here's where I'm completely different from the big five in my philosophy. They're using the term conscientiousness for an indelible, immutable, unchanging trait of a person that they were born with, when conscientiousness, by the old definition, by the ancient philosophers' definition, was that which can be grown through new experiences of doing wrong and
right,
learning your lesson that you hurt somebody's feelings, and you have empathy and you would never want to do that again. And
right,
so you grow something to yourself after having made a bad decision. That's
yes,
conscientiousness and conscience. So conscience on the one hand, and then intuition, worldly wisdom about environments. Once you've tried enough of them and made enough unique decisions in them about various kinds of problem, that's wisdom. Ethics or conscientiousness and intuition
I
there's no
I
more
agree.
simple way to describe it.
Right. Yeah, I
Wisdom.
love that. I mean, it's you have sort of the ability to your guideposts, your logical moral guideposts, and your affective element of bringing to bear your own experience. You've got rationalism and empiricism there. So I would say what it's important for people to do to become wiser is to learn to become more observant. And I think that goes back as a master skill to so many situations of, I mean, EMDR is basically, if there's learned helplessness,
Yeah.
EMDR is learned curiosity because it
Ah,
tells you, I'm going to hold on to that one. That's a fun one. This idea that, wait a moment, this isn't going to go how you expect in a good way. So if you can do that, because foolishness is really historically attributed to making the same mistake repeatedly. I think now it's often
yes.
called insanity, but I think to be
Yeah. Well,
that's
that comes from, marketer Tony Robbins. I mean,
so the idea that
originally, I think.
yeah, the idea that you make the same mistake repeatedly and that's called insanity. Well, I don't know that that many people make the exact same mistake more than once. I think they make iterations on that. And so it becomes things like you think that this time you can change that kind of person that you're giving a chance.
What are
Saying,
you getting at? I mean, that statement that I once heard Tony Robbins say, I don't know if he's the originator. Definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over. Every marketer you ever hear of says that. I think that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Because didn't you and I talk about a film or a mini series that we saw called Black Rabbit, where we were talking about the repetition compulsion? But wouldn't that
percent.
be a reason to repeat something?
Yeah.
Uh,
So
there's
boys, it
there's more
fits.
depth to psychology than this idea. Insanity is repeating a thing over and
Yeah.
over again.
Yeah. Right. No, and I'll tell you what I was getting at. You asked what I was getting at. I was getting at the fact that ignorance and foolishness and heads being foolhardy is making similar mistakes over and over and over again, like picking on someone who has more power than you out of anger, lashing out, like not learning to control your own appetites is foolishness. And it's when you learn a lesson, like learning a lesson once is very powerful. Learning once, oh, well, this was something that didn't work out that well, so I'm going to try a different tactic, right? Or learning from others' mistakes even is very wise. So
Sure.
that's all I was saying was your model, this idea of developing intuition, like having good intuition for own experiences comes from observing what works and doesn't work and
And
build
it
a
might come
Rolodex.
from making 1,000 bad choices
Yeah,
about
I'm
the
remembering.
same matter and learning a subtle nuance with each one, almost like a hologram,
Right.
like seeing the 3D picture of the mistake
Yeah.
so completely that you finally will not make it again.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm in favor of that being valid.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Well, Freud, I wanted to say at the beginning too, this relates. Freud said he has two proofs of the unconscious. One is obvious, everybody knows it. It's that we dream. And dreams don't make any
Okay.
sense. And dreams must come from the unconscious, therefore. They're completely illogical and they're not a coherent storyline. But he said his second proof of the unconscious is that we still wage war. It makes no sense that we wage war. It's utterly illogical that
Okay.
we wage war. So I thought that was interesting as far as the impact to the unconscious mind.
Yeah. I mean, yes. I think there's a lot to unpack there on hoping that war goes differently. I mean, hoping that this time, if this time it's a good cause, blah, blah, blah. I'm staying out of the political ramifications of that. But I think everybody thinks their situation's different. Everybody thinks that something like with war you're talking about. I mean,
At ground level, formerly foolish person lacking in intuition might have believed that as a good moral person, everybody else in the world must also have good intentions for them
Yeah.
in
Terrible.
kind. That's what I mean, and that's what Freud probably meant. He didn't mean World War II
Okay.
literally. He meant humans do bad things to each other. They manipulate each other. They take advantage of each other. They compete fraudulently with each other. They hurt each other.
Yes.
That's what he meant.
Yeah. I mean, yes. So I think one way to look at it is when you say, when you become create a hologram almost of your choices and decisions, that's very powerful. And what gets in the way of that? Well, should thinking and transference and hurt feelings, emotional volatility. So the inability to see a situation for what it is because you're clouded either by optimism or pessimism. Those are all things that are so important that we spend entire sessions, if not longer, usually much longer, in psychotherapy talking with clients about. Like radical acceptance is this idea that's so, well, radically simple, but difficult to just look at a situation, whether it's right or wrong, and see what you can learn from it. And you can't be the observer and the subject at the same time. You have to get out of the situation mentally and say, this objectively as much as I can, what is there to learn here? Sometimes that means like looking at when you're scammed or when someone is untrustworthy or when you might have been wrong. It's tough to do.
Well,
Very.
well, yeah. What one of the there were two very different sources of giving me ideas about thinking about morality as a function of decision making. One was an early advisor, a mentor in psychiatry. Once I was a resident, and his
Mhm.
name is Mike Moran. And I once asked him the question, what is the antidote for ambivalence? Because we are learning about ambivalence in therapy and in patients. What causes ambivalence? And I asked him, well, what's the cure for ambivalence? And he said, well, I would suppose it's any decision. Make
Yeah.
any decision at all,
Yes.
so long as it's not completely foolhardy. Make
Yes.
a decision. Just do it. Just make a decision is the
Yeah.
cure for ambivalence. And that really influenced my thinking about these two drivers of decisions as being our ethics or conscience. I don't want to hurt others, but also our intuition. I don't want to get hurt.
Right.
I want to do what's good for me, but also what's good for others. But simply by doing any decision, we're going to learn something. We're going to learn that we did hurt other people to some degree, a slight degree, not as bad as previously, or we're going to learn that we get hurt to some degree, some slight degree, less than we did in the past.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
we're aggregating our experiences with both of these drivers. And then the thing that unified it all for me was learning about the I forget the author of the book. It was made into a film, Beautiful Mind, starring Russell Crowe
Yeah. The
and
Nash.
the
Go ahead.
Nash equilibrium concept, for which John Nash won the Nobel Prize in 1967, which today we recognize in the form of game theory of economics and the Nash equilibrium being win-win versus win-lose decision making and
Right.
behavior. And that win-lose behavior just shoots you off like a rocket ahead of the competition at first, but quickly causes you to lose. Whereas win-win behavior, even if it's a big win for you and a small win for others, has a stabilizing effect on your progress economically. The same would apply to friendship and behavioral economics and emotional commerce, let's
I
say.
mean, Yeah, it would, and I think we're at a player versus player analogy now for everything. I mean, your online dating is basically two strangers, and until you establish good rapport, it's player versus player. It's who can escape first and damage the other person's algorithm. Because if you keep getting unmatched, it makes your algorithm, your profile look less attractive. Basically, we've got incentives to do win lose. And I think there's a sweet spot of technology and empathy, or if you like, technology and ethics, whatever you want to call it, morality, where it's incentivized that people are at least decent and polite to one another. So you don't really get anything from stress and unnecessary rejection. What you get from that is guardedness, and you get somatic markers of the other sex being dangerous or hurtful. One
Yeah.
and another, the idea of discernment comes to mind with what you're talking about. Natalie had spoken about that, and I know you.
Yeah,
uh,
Natalie's big on that lately.
Yeah,
Discernment. But
which is
would you say what is discernment in her view? Is it being able to see the matrix? Is that what it is?
yeah. So
Psychologically? It's
the
seeing what's really going on in the behavior of others and maybe in yourself?
Yeah, I think it's the ability to understand, to see the current of an interpersonal situation. So instead of it's understanding what's going on. I have her definition. I had to find it. Remain with discomfort without rushing to resolve it. Okay. So, and I talked to her about how this is very much like differentiation in that Murray Bowenian sense from,
Uh-huh.
again, Murray Bowen, the great genogram creator, who did so much more than that, but, and who also talked about societal regression. Anyway, the ability to remain with discomfort, okay, pause in the presence of contradiction, cool, respond from your inner authority rather than from emotional hijack or social scripts. Okay, so basically, it's the ability to be present in the moment without emotionally respond. Well, so staying with what's unresolved. Okay, so what I'm getting from that is
I think
that
it's
it's keeping
knowing
a
what
cool
time it
head.
is.
Yeah, keeping a cool.
It's knowing what time it is.
Yeah,
That nothing's getting past me. I know what's going on. I know what time it is.
yeah, I think, and that takes a cool head. That takes, and you've talked about cool being a synonym for mindful, basically. I think that's really where that comes
Yeah.
in, right? Like James Bond or any heroic male character or female, really. There's a lot of cool heroic female characters are going to, when the chips are
Be
down,
observant.
yeah,
They're gonna pay
always
attention and
lost.
be observant. It's
Right.
knowing what time it is. It's you're
Bingo.
awake and aware, maybe stoic, maybe not
Yeah.
necessarily non-responsive, but you know what's going on in behavior.
Yes.
You're reading it.
Yeah, and
Okay.
that takes practice. It takes a responsiveness instead of reactiveness, for one, and that's been a big dichotomy people have written about, is like the reactive person is very quick to speak and be defensive, but responding is more reasoned and polite. It's kind of it all goes back to the idea of the wise mind being emotion and logic. So kind of that dichotomy you're talking about too, of the ethical code, the logical ethic, and then emotion, or the intuition that is accumulated from past decisions. So but which again, so much the better. I think we're seeing more of that model that steps away from the worst parts of early Western psychology and pop psychology, which is what dominates a lot now. So we've kind of gone from one extreme to the other in the psychology world. We've gone from, very analytic level to like the snobbery of the Analytic Institute, which is fun to think about all the terms and all of the, like, it's get
Right.
lost in terminology, but it doesn't really heal anyone.
Except when we keep changing terms constantly, then you don't know
Well,
what you're even dealing with. But
that's a power game.
that's for another. Yeah. The power of linguistics. With new patients, that like a speech I'll give them almost every single time with a new person has to do with how psychiatry and psychology are very, very related. I mean, psychiatry is more medicine prescribing these days, but
Absolutely.
we also need to understand what's going on psychologically. And I'll tell them how Freud's term for it was the talking cure. And
Right.
that means it's all based in words. And to this day, even the thing we call the DSM, which newbies out of school are using to rigorously diagnose people based on certain features of behavior that they have,
Yes.
it's still based in words. And the reason it's called DSM, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, is because we're never 100% sure because it's words we're talking about. If somebody says,
Absolutely.
Doc, I got mood swings, does that automatically mean they have bipolar? No. But to them, they're having what they're calling mood swings. It's their words for their experience. And then you have to somehow decode what those words mean, right?
Yeah.
So it's never perfect when we're diagnosing through words, just mere words, which
Yeah.
is why I always thought it was useful to try to rigorously define based on theorists who came before and philosophers before them what exactly a word means. That conscientiousness has something to do with ethical, caring for others' welfare, that the decision I'm about to make is going to be good to others.
Yes.
That's ethical. Then intuitive is, yeah, I could have an intuition that something will benefit a person. Intuition is about, I feel a sense of foreboding about this dark alley. Maybe I shouldn't walk down it.
Sure.
Why? Because I've walked down dark alleys, and then bad things happen. I'm making that
Yes.
up. But those two things combined, I think, are wisdom. And part of what leads me to that, besides the Nash equilibrium, is thinking about the wisest person who supposedly ever lived, King Solomon,
Yes.
with his decision about dividing the baby.
Yeah.
The false mother and the real mother both claim a baby as their own.
Yep.
They go to the king to let him decide who is the real mother, who's the baby going to go with. And the
Yeah.
king says, cut the baby in two and give half to each mother. At which the real mother said, no, she can have the baby. And that's how he knew she was the real mother.
Right.
The idea behind that being that there was both goodness, ethical, good wishes for the welfare of others in there,
Yes.
but there was
Yes.
a shrewdness that a used car salesman might have to know the right move to pull on the two mothers to bring out the true mother. That there was a shrewdness in there too.
Right.
And that's
No,
why I think both are needed.
yeah, it's the mentalization, like, no, like, kind of
It's
present
not just mentalization, though. Mentalization would be, all right, I'm here, I'm present, I'm paying attention. This is experiential. It's experiential. I've been through this 1,000 times, and I've made bad decisions 500 of those times. And I've cultivated that into a sense of shrewdness through having been there, done that so very many times. When I think of mentalization, I think of just being mindful, paying
well,
attention in the here and now.
the Fonagy and Bateman mentalization model involves being able to guess how someone else is gonna respond to what you do or what you say.
Okay.
So, it's
Okay.
something that's typically impaired in people with BPD. So, that whole model helps them to and so, yeah, it's the mindfulness of your own present, which can be impaired in many people, but also the mindfulness of how your behavior is likely to provoke a response, like what kind of response is likely to provoke in somebody else. So,
And that'll be dependent on what you've seen and heard and done.
right,
It'll depend on your life's experience.
exactly. And so
Okay.
if you can think, well, what would a responsible mother do? Like what is likely what the real mother would say? It's peak mentalization versus let's how do I know what makes a good mother, right? Like being willing to see the child live at any cost. You have to know that. You have to know
Right.
and the responsible parent, like not just mother. So the idea that you have the ethical part of knowing sound ethics and then the intuitive part of how do you intuit those things? How do you notice them? You're making me think of that model of I'm going to give you the name in a second here.
I like the sound effects, the clicking key sounds. That's really cool. No, I like it.
Well,
You're thinking and working hard on this problem.
yeah.
I think Natalie Martinek would have something to say about the false mother in the King Solomon situation, who obviously is possessed by envy. Because the
Yeah.
false mother says, "Sure, cut the baby in half. I'm fine with that."
Well, I would have
Right?
to say
Which obviously is just pure envy
and I didn't
on
want
her
to
part. It's
yeah,
why she stole the baby in the first place, is out
I
of envy.
I didn't want to
Oh,
derail you on that. Go ahead,
that's
sorry.
okay. No, no, that's okay. I
But I
I
thought
I
I
just
was wondering too, like what is that why would you say as an adult you can think, well, why would someone say, fine, do that? Like, do you hate do you not care enough about that child that you stole to think, well, let it live rather
but
than me
that's
have it?
Freud's definition of the unconscious. Like, his 2 proofs of the unconscious were, 1, we dream, but number 2, we wage war. And that's war between women. That's war between 2, a real mother and a false mother. One of the ways women wage war is by way of envy leading to reputation destruction.
I mean,
It
I think reputation destruction is definitely one of those constructs that has been getting more of the attention it deserves. Like in any yeah, go ahead.
well, gossip.
Clinically speaking
I
too.
mean, as an extreme version of gossip.
It's what you see in the workplace as a way to get people fired. Like that's what most stuff has turned into reputational destruction, I think. Abilities to most sort of occupational and polite society retribution, retributory stuff. I think really you could even say that reputation destruction has been the way anybody has gotten essentially in any trouble since the days of pistol dueling. I think it goes back much further than our current epic, you could say, not to derail your
There's
thing.
a point to be made for that. I also think it is true that, without getting into the weeds, I think it is true that it is a way for females to be aggressive with the least danger to their person. It's a way of aggression. Generally, on the bell curve of females, it's a way of aggression, and it has always been around since the beginning of time. And yes, males can do it too, but males will sometimes be aggressive in very overt physical ways, or they'll yell, they'll raise their voice, or they'll get angry, or they'll go stomping into your mutual supervisor's office in some more having a physicality to it. Whereas envy and gossip, we all gossip, right? As Steve Stewart Williams points out to us, something like what's he say? 70% of human communication is just gossip,
He quoted a
whether it's
pretty big statistic about that.
whether it's male or female. But the female instinct for gossiping that the evolutionary psychologists talk about, to wrap them into the social fabric of the village safely, ran in part on gossip, sharing secrets, the sharing of secrets. Even Deborah Tannen talks about that sharing secrets is the ultimate for little girls on the playground. And the ultimate harm that little girls do to other little girls is to exclude the other little girls from their secrets, their gossip. Anyway, yeah, we could get into the weeds on that, but let's not. Still there, or are you frozen? You look frozen. Either I have exceptionally bored Jeremy, or we're on a screen freeze here. Hopefully it comes back. One of the things that I was going to wind things up with is, we were talking about morality, and we promised to say something about narcissism. And a way to kind of encapsulate a lot of what we have talked about tonight as far as the taxonomy of the working parts of morality, decision making, and character that we mentioned, I would peg morality as being uniquely about decision making, making the wisest decisions you can, which are both good to others, but also successful for you too, mutually. And that's where the Nash equilibrium comes in, the win win. A win for others, but a win for you too. That's morality. But I think morality is just part of our overarching character. Yeah, I think we lost Jeremy there. He just disappeared. Maybe I can re-invite. Let's see here. I'm going to give that a try. Okay. So morality is about decision making, and it is a subset of character overall, character virtue, or what Aristotle called goodness. And character is different from personality. Personality is a style. Character is where are you on the path to growing mature and growing in goodness. And so I believe there to be two other factors besides morality in overall good character. Jeremy alluded numerous times to one of them, and that's theory of mind, or Freud called it observing ego, or many people today would just call it mindfulness or self reflection, the capacity for self reflection. And then the big one, boundaries. So self reflection or mindfulness or observing ego, personal boundary ability, and then morality. I think those three things combined are the pillars. If you can't add anything else to it, those are the pillars of character virtue or overall goodness. And that's how morality fits into the picture. Now, that character virtue, that overall goodness, is the antidote that we alluded to in our title to narcissism. It's the opposite of narcissism. So when Jeremy had said, Heinz Kohut said that narcissism is like being a child in an adult's body. Here he comes. He's back.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe there was just a rolling internet outage or something like that, I don't know.
Yeah. 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 It's all good. We were just talking about there were a lot of hearts there. I think about you coming back. And yeah. And we were talking about what's the taxonomy of morality, character, character virtue versus personality way over here, a style versus narcissism, the opposite of character. And I was just saying how you explained to me that Kohut once described narcissism as being like being a child in an adult's body, which,
Well, do you go ahead,
yeah.
you go.
Well, so therefore, i- in our title, we were offering morality as part of the way to fight narcissism. It is part of the way to fight it. But I believe there are two other pillars to character as the overarching antidote for narcissism, which is just growing up, maturing as a person. There's no such thing as a mature personality or an immature personality. Your personality is just your personality. It's what you were born with. It's a style, but
Mhm.
maturity can be grown. So, morality, good decisions, wisdom of decisions, which has ethics or conscientiousness and intuition to the decisions. The second you've alluded to numerous times tonight, and that is theory of mind, or Freud called it observing ego, or
Right.
many people today just call it mindfulness or self reflection. Those that talk about narcissistic abuse reference the need for self reflection. And then the third one, probably the biggest of them all, is personal boundary ability, to have
Okay.
personal boundaries. And so before we got on tonight, Jeremy, we were talking about how somebody could be a good moral person who is ethical and does right by others, maybe even who has intuition about their own self care, but just can't help themselves with poor boundaries regarding love or friendship or money or something. They just can't help themselves with as far as their boundaries work, and things still go poorly for them. There's still a poor outcome for them, even though
Right.
they're a highly moral person. So morality by itself isn't enough to have a good life. And also the person that can't pay attention or is distracted all the time, has reasonable boundaries, is a good and moral person, wants to do right by others, but they just miss the
Yeah.
boat and they're late and it's like they have ADD or they're just distractible for some reason.
Well,
They also don't have a good outcome.
right. I'm gonna have to cut out in a minute. I love all what you're saying. So
Yeah.
cool stuff. My view on I would add to that that we see that with Jake in Black Rabbit. We see that he doesn't really have the ability to say no to his brother. I mean, he does, and he has it for a long time, and then doesn't. So I think that that capacity to um, say no when you have to is crucial. So I don't think that I know it. So it's very cool that we're discussing that. That's where having a good parental self object in Kohut terms, like
Mm.
having parents who model that, good mentors who model that, that you can kind of introject that. I think that so you had said that being narcissistic is like having an adult and child's excuse me, a child in an adult's body. And that really reflects what I've been saying is that that reflects on how Kohut viewed narcissism as a developmental arrest. So
Yes.
because let's say the person doesn't receive empathic mirroring from a parent, and that gets into the mentalization talk about mirroring and the dance of being seen and knowing what emotions mean and parents reflecting emotions back to you, all that fun stuff that we've now learned more about. But so mirroring and then idealization. So I think a good takeaway is where do you get your morality, or excuse me, where do you get your ethic? If you don't have good parental figures, you have to receive that elsewhere. And then where do you develop your intuition? Well, if you haven't reflected on your experiences in a way that serves you, journaling and looking back and working through that with a therapist that can help you learn to more objectively view your experiences, that might be helpful as well. It's a really rich conversation.
Well said.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you,
Well,
man.
it's very good stuff. I only have to go in a second here just because it's almost won my time, and this
Well,
is a lot of fun.
yeah, you got to be able to say no, man. You just did.
That's a really good point.
There you go. Parallel process. Thanks for coming on. And
Yeah,
thank you all for joining and all the hearts.
yes, I appreciate it. Very cool.
You got it. We'll talk soon. Thanks.